Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Workers' Party of Britain broadcast. I'm really excited today to be joined by Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Syria and new Workers' Party member. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm glad to be aboard.
Yes. And just to start, can you tell us a bit about why you decided to join the Workers' Party of Britain and how did you sort of find out about us?
Well, three basic reasons. First of all, for a long time, I've admired George Galloway, our leader. He's been very brave, very effective, very successful in his campaigning, and above all, to my mind, very outspoken in a good way on the issue of imperialism and saying no to NATO. Before that, I admired his positions on the question of the Palestinians and the Middle East generally, his opposition to wars in Iraq and before that, Yugoslavia. So that's the first reason. Secondly, I've always self-identified as being on the left.
Yep.
So a socialist party which is really on the left, not like the fake Labour Party,
yep.
Which I left when Jeremy Corbyn was defenestrated, with a great leader. And thirdly, I think the moment is opportune for a party like the Workers' Party to stand out. We're in a particularly feverish political moment with the permanent crisis, obviously the war crisis, the alleged climate crisis. Before that, we had the health crisis. And now we have the cost of living crisis. So I think it's a good time for minority parties to make their mark and maybe make a breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the timing is good, and that was what made me take the plunge.
Yeah, well, we're very excited to have you, and I mean, you've already been such a key sort of speaker for the No to NATO, No to War platform. We were up in Edinburgh recently, speaking at a meeting there among other meetings. And I know that your background in the diplomatic service as an ambassador, sort of close to those seats of power, is really invaluable. But for those who may not know, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you became an ambassador and how you've moved from there to find your way on the sort of fringe of politics?
Well, I was in the Foreign Office for about 35 years, joined straight from university. It had always been my ambition to travel and do something political, so it seemed an obvious choice to go for diplomacy. Not very obvious for someone with my social background. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and certainly the first also to try for Oxford and to get there, and then to aim at the civil service and the Foreign Office, which is the most difficult part of the civil service to enter, was ambitious, but I was helped by a socialist, Harold Wilson, at the time, who was putting pressure on the civil service to welcome people like me. So I think I may have benefited from positive discrimination, which now we hate, of course, but then it was a good thing. So I joined, and as I'd already studied languages at college, I was a natural to volunteer for learning Arabic, and that's how I kicked off my career as a Foreign Office Arabist. I spent about half my 35 years working in the Middle East, eventually rising, fortunately, to ambassador in Bahrain and then on to Syria. And then I was lucky enough to get a second career. I joined the UN, still staying in the Middle East and leveraging my knowledge of the region and my Arabic to get a very interesting job supporting Palestinian refugees. So I was combining a cause that I very much supported with a second career. I did that for 8 years before I eventually retired and embarked on an unpaid career as a campaigner, initially on the subject of Syria, in which, of course, having been ambassador, I was an acknowledged expert. And Syria was a very hot subject, so I was lucky enough to get a lot of exposure. And then more broadly, I started to join the campaign against imperialism and NATO, and here we are.
And was there something that you witnessed sort of during your career in the diplomatic service or in the UN that sort of led you to take an anti-imperialist position?
I'd always leaned a bit that way. I was that generation of Labour supporters that wasn't very keen on warmongering, wasn't very keen on NATO. So for a long time, I'd been leaned that way, but things rather came to a head when I became ambassador to Syria, and I saw how unfairly Britain and the West was already beginning back then to treat Syria. This was several years before the outbreak of violence in Syria, but still the anti-Syrian animus was there. And then when I joined the UN, the conflict was underway, and the hatred of Syria became even more blatant. And luckily, in that position in the UN, I was able to do a bit of good behind the scenes, visiting Syria, supporting the Palestinian refugees during the conflict. And then, of course, when I retired, well, I could come out of the closet. Previously, that wasn't possible because it would have embarrassed my UN employer.
Yep.
That wouldn't have done much good for anybody. But the moment the traps were open, I was out like a shot and started to campaign here in this country.
And have you, I guess you said that you were a member of the Labour Party until Jeremy Corbyn was sort of defenestrated, I think is the word you used. Have you had any contact from anyone sort of from your previous career since you've come out, so to speak, as a anti-imperialist, sort of asking you what you're doing or wondering, what's changed?
No, I have been ostracized. I haven't, in all honesty, tried to make contact with them. And they certainly haven't tried to make contact with me, even though a neutral observer might think that someone who knows Syria as thoroughly as I do might have been consulted. I could have spared them from some embarrassing mistakes, like in the early days of the conflict, the Foreign Office were predicting that Assad was about to be toppled. I could have spared them that embarrassment, getting that so terribly wrong. But no, I haven't had any contact, and I don't particularly regret that.
Yeah. I guess it wasn't really you that changed though, but rather the Labour Party's sort of changed quite a bit over the last 20 to 30 years. Can you talk a bit about sort of what you saw? I mean, I don't know how active you were within the Labour Party, but how you've seen especially their foreign policy change since the Blair Brown years to now.
When I was very young, I was a young socialist. There was an organization of young socialists.
Yep.
But then when I started work, I drifted away from, I was no longer a member of the party, but I rejoined when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader. I was one of those, how many was it, 500,000?
Yeah.
Who rejoined the party, inspired by the prospect of the party being led by someone who was avowedly against NATO, and wanted to follow an independent foreign policy, appeared to understand more about the Middle East, about Palestine, about Syria, and I enthusiastically rejoined the party and had some contacts, fed in some advice informally into the shadow cabinet.
And what do you think sort of Labour's, I guess we're looking at a general election next year, aren't we? And what do you think are Labour's chances of sort of taking power next year?
I'm afraid they are doomed to succeed. It seems nailed on that the Tories will lose very heavily, and it will be more a Tory defeat than a Labour victory. I really can't believe that many people will vote in Labour enthusiastically, or at least only those who have a vested interest and can see money to be made will be enthusiastic about it. The rest of the country will vote more against something than for something. It will be I fear, in my view, is no different from anybody else. It looks like a foregone conclusion, but it will throw up new opportunities.
Yep.
It will be another feverish, it will ratchet up the fever of British politics. In no time, there will be disenchantment with Labour. That will set in within months. And hopefully that will mean disenchantment with their foreign policy. In the meanwhile, the Tories may tear themselves apart, the party may split, and that also may throw up new opportunities for the emergence of perhaps a new populist party with a crossover appeal to right and left.
Yeah, I think, that's definitely, it will definitely be an opportunity for the Workers' Party to talk to those who, I think you coined the slogan left behind by the Labour Party. My hope, if there is a Labour victory, that the trade unions will also realise that they have to advocate for their members separate to the political vehicle of the Labour Party, and you can't just sort of wait for an election to roll around and hope that they increase public sector pay and those kinds of things, and that actually it's up to us to fight for those things for ourselves and not rely on some other sort of institution to do it for us. So I guess we'll wait and see, but I think next year, as you say, is going to be an interesting year for British politics and for the public.
Yeah. You kindly reminded us of my phrase, left behind. Yes, we of the left, we haven't moved. The real left, we haven't changed. It's Labour which has moved way over to the right, so far to the right that they're now outflanking the Tories on the right in warmongering, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess to change tune for a moment, the Workers' Party had a conference on the weekend, which was about automation, the rebuilding of British industry, and you submitted a really interesting paper on net zero. Can you tell us a bit about your position on the net zero policy and sort of how you came to take the position?
Well, until a couple of years ago, I was sort of neutral on green issues. I was always sort of caring about the natural environment, but when it came to climate, I was always a little bit skeptical. But this came to a head for me when I came into contact with Piers Corbyn,
mm-hmm.
Who campaigned strongly on this issue. And prompted by that, I began to study the issue myself and became convinced that the theoretical underpinnings of climate alarmism were very questionable. All the basic theories can be called into very serious question, and reputable figures like the co-founder of Greenpeace disassociated themselves with climate activism and with the core theories of warming and how it's allegedly caused by man. So I've serious. I could do a PhD in now, and I'm thoroughly convinced that the alarmism is just that, unjustified alarmism, and it's harmful to workers.
Yeah.
The costs are beginning to be felt now as people see threats that they have to rip out their gas boilers and put heat pumps in, as they feel pressured to buy expensive electric cars, as they see their taxes going up because of the huge subsidies that are required by renewables. And the more I studied the subject, the more I saw how much defeat was involved in making the climate alarmist case.
Yeah.
Every claim they made, when you look into it, is on shaky grounds, and they cherry pick the evidence. It's not scientific at all. So I've been pretty indignant about that. Above all, it seems futile to me to pursue this goal of net zero, when even if we do make net zero, it won't make a blind bit of difference to the world picture.
Yeah.
Britain accounts for only about 1% of global net emissions. And even if we took ourselves back to the Neanderthal age, which is what would really be involved, it wouldn't change the climate. It is futile and costly, and I think it's the biggest attack on workers' welfare since Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I know within the party there's, maybe a bit of division about the climate change as an issue, but I think, we should all agree that net zero as a policy, as a program of the ruling class, is not in the interests of workers. No matter what's going on in the environment, we shouldn't accept, worse living conditions, worse working conditions. And as you say, sort of going back to the Stone Age, or eating bugs and not being allowed to drive, and all of these kinds of things that are basically being proposed and in some places being implemented bit by bit with, low traffic neighborhoods and clean air zones. I know where I live in Birmingham, they have a clean air zone, and really trying to prevent people from the convenience of driving themselves to where they need to be. without actually building that public transport infrastructure to facilitate, you know, the need to move around and access the spaces that, you know, public are entitled to access.
Exactly, Lauren, and it's ordinary people who are feeling the brunt. This is really part of class war.
Yeah.
When you look at who these activists are, they are so bourgeois, spoiled bourgeois brats.
Yeah.
They're in the front line. They don't have workers behind them.
No.
If net zero by 2030 was put to a referendum, I think I would wager, put a very big wager on our side winning.
Yeah.
But of course, they're not going to give us that opportunity. They learned from the mistake they made over offering a Brexit referendum, that when the people get a choice, they choose not in the way the bourgeois want them to choose.
Yeah. And I think people can see very clearly that, you know, the billionaires of this world are not giving up anything. You know, they're still traveling around on their private jets and buying their beachfront properties and, you know, eating and drinking and, you know, enjoying their lives to the heart's content. It's only us who are being asked to make those sacrifices. And it's just completely contradictory. I mean, I think in Glasgow, was it last year or the year before, where they had the COP conference and they all flew in on their private jets and, you know, driving around in gas guzzling vehicles, telling us that we need to cut back, we need to sacrifice.
Absolutely. But I would just urge people not to feel bad about it, not to sort of have a slightly guilty conscience, thinking that they're doing something bad for the planet, but they have to resist it because it's just so expensive. No, the claims that are made are bogus. The polar bears are doing absolutely fine. The polar bear numbers are increasing. Sea levels are not rising dramatically. They've risen about 2 millimeters in 20 years. Average world temperature has remained stable for the last 25 years, as measured by satellites, not as measured by thermometers that they put on the airway of RAF stations, just as and take measurements just after a jet has gone past. The rigging of the information on this subject, if you begin to look into it, you will become indignant and you will not feel in the least bit guilty. You are being a serious scientist. At all events, the conclusion is the same, that net zero by 2030 is absurd and will impoverish us, and we won't be able to put the lights on.
Yeah, well, we'll include a link to your article sort of in the description on the YouTube when we put this up. But also on Saturday, you know, we had the net zero discussion, but also you presented some ideas around the Bank of England, which I hadn't thought of before, but I thought were really interesting. Do you want to share your campaign idea on that?
Well, the Bank of England has been calling it wrong on the economy for so many years. They began printing funny money around 2008, encouraged by Gordon Brown as the way out of the subprime crisis, which it helped to create anyway by driving interest rates down to an abnormally low level. No wonder people got into massive debt, and that led to a lot of bank collapses. And as a result, they had to print funny money, which they then did again in spades during the COVID crisis to pay for the stupid furloughs. When Sunak encouraged them to do so. So a sensible observer cannot have faith in the Bank of England, in their expertise. It's a myth. They get all the big calls wrong. And when you think about it, it's odd that elected government should have conceded to these serially mistaken mandarins control over the economy through their control over interest rates. Again, this was originated by Gordon Brown, still very active, I see, in Labour ruling circles. And I think it's time to take power back from the Bank of England over setting interest rates. I would argue, alongside many real experts in fiscal policy, that the current high interest rates are way overdone, and in fact fueling inflation because they heap high borrowing costs on firms.
Yep.
Many firms are then able to pass this on in higher prices to the ordinary citizen. And after 12, 13 increases, we're not seeing any appreciable lowering of the inflation rate, but the bank proposed to make even steeper increases, and it's always the ordinary citizen who pays the price. So I think we should take power back, and then we can have mortgages and lower inflation.
Yep. I think, I mean, we live in a bourgeois democracy, if you will, but we don't even really live in any kind of democracy at all, when the power to raise interest rates and harm so many families and really allow the economy to spiral out of control is not in the hands of government, of our elected officials. It's in the hands of bureaucrats who are not accountable to anybody. Just as we wanted to leave the European Union to bring back control of Britain to the people of Britain, and we want to leave NATO to bring back, control of our defences under, British control. It's the same sort of concept. It's about independence, really, isn't it? And about some semblance of democracy.
Well, just a few months ago, we witnessed a virtual coup. I'm not going to defend Liz Truss, but it's a fact that she was undermined by the Bank of England, and it was the bank who planted the dagger in her back. Now, this is anti-democratic, and these are people who are serial bunglers. Elected politicians could not do worse than the Bank of England has over the last quarter of a century. They simply cannot be trusted. It's true that elected politicians may be tempted to juggle with the interest rates in accordance with the electoral cycle, but based on previous experience, that would be less bad than what we've seen in the last quarter of a century of mismanagement by the Bank of England.
And even if the elected politicians did sort of tinker with the interest rates for their own sort of ends, at least the people would have some means of trying to sort of remove them, wouldn't they? So
exactly, they would be judged. It couldn't be hidden.
Yeah.
This is the democratic way, after all. But the trend has been for elites to gather more and more power onto themselves in many areas of political life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of brings us back to the beginning when we were talking about, well, your diplomatic career and international affairs, and you've been talking on the No to NATO platform, and you've been a long time anti-imperialist campaigner. And we are facing, multiple crises in the international sort of sphere as well. Can you give us some insight into, I guess we've got a number of different things happening at the moment, don't we, with the war in Ukraine, the drive to war with China, the rise of BRICS, and also the Shanghai cooperation with, I think, Iran now gaining full membership. And I guess there's a real sort of seismic shift in the organization of the world, isn't there? So How do you see this sort of developing over the next few years?
Yes, I think the days of the American empire are numbered, and the Ukraine conflict has catalyzed some developments that were in the pipeline, growing resentment against American bullying, American overreach with sanctioning everybody left, right, and center, encircling China, things like that. The Ukraine crisis has forced the rest of the world to become more conscious of this division. George Bush famously said around the time of the Iraq War, "You're either with us or against us." Well, most of the world is against America now. And an example of that was the way Saudi Arabia made a form of peace with Iran, very much against American wishes, with the result that there is now more stability in the Gulf. The Americans are less able to blackmail the Saudis to do their bidding. China is emerging as a very important power in this new geopolitical situation. China has realized that if the Americans get their way by changing the regime in Moscow, then they'll be next on the hit list. So in a way, the Ukraine crisis has done the world a favor, accelerated the realization on the part of I guess some Americans would call them the deplorables. Part of the world, this was Hillary Clinton's word for Trump supporters, a basket of deplorables. Well, there's also in the wider world a basket of deplorables set against what the Americans, the British like to call the international community, by which they mean the white countries of America, Canada, and Europe, the British dominions, the EU, and the US. That is not the world.
No.
Not even a quarter of the world, but they like to pretend that Russia is isolated, ostracized, when the rest of the world is either supportive of Russia or neutral. But the globalists continue to try to portray the international community as being united on Ukraine. There's a blatant lie.
But yeah, as you said, it has kind of, I guess, awoken this kind of more anti-imperialist sentiment in some nations across Africa and Asia and South America that had maybe sort of been a bit quieter in recent times, because they have been forced, as you said, with us or against us. Well, we're against you. And I think that's, a really positive development. And things like the Shanghai Cooperation and BRICS, it's a real counter to the power of the EU and the US empire. And the US can't get away with just bullying. They can't get away with going in and exploiting and taking what they think is rightfully theirs anymore. And it's interesting, though, how these things will come to a head in the next few years. It could end up in a major world war, or we could see some relative peace. It's an interesting time.
A lot will hinge on the next American presidential election. I hesitate to say it, but I'm rooting for Trump, because at least he wants America to draw in its horns, to look after itself, improve its own infrastructure, which is surprisingly poor for such a rich country. Stop spending billions on this imperial dream. He says he will make peace with Russia very quickly, and I think he's able to do that. But if it goes the other way, and we have 4 more years of Biden, well, God help us.
God help us, yeah. So we've discussed, I guess, a few of the ideas that you have for campaigns for the Workers' Party, and is there anything else that you wanted to share about the work that you're keen to get involved with now that you're in the party and campaigning for us?
Well, we've already touched on my anti-greenery. I do hope to persuade the party to draw the party over to being more active, more vociferous in opposing the mad rush to net zero, because I think it's a political, apart from anything else, it's a political winner. There is a gap in the political market. None of the established parties is willing to grasp this bull by the horns and say that net zero by 2030 is absurd. I think the first party that grabs this bull by the horns will reap a big reward. And so I want to push this idea of, I call it Zexit, zero exit. And there are these parallels with Brexit.
Yeah.
For one thing, it's much the same people. You've
yeah.
got the people who read The Guardian on the one hand, the EU supporters, Remoaners, climate activists, Labour Party,
NATO supporters.
and on the other, you have us deplorables. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there, and we should campaign on the slogan of repealing the Climate Change Act. It's far less complicated than Brexit. You don't have to negotiate with anybody to get out of the absurd commitments that we've gotten ourselves into. No other advanced country, or any country at all, I think, has made it a legal commitment to reach net zero by a set date. We are handcuffed.
Yeah.
So repealing that act, it will make a good focus for campaigning, I believe.
Great. Well, we look forward to working with you closely on that campaign, and yeah, as you said, taking it to the people, and I think it's a real winner, as you said. So thanks again, Peter, for joining us, and thank you for joining the party. We're really so excited to have you on board, and I'm sure we'll be making full use of you with all of these campaign ideas that you had. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. I hope that can be useful.
I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.